Hello, my name is Ruth Sanderson. My artwork appears in children's books, greeting cards, collector's plates, puzzles, and for the past 4 years, I've been creating adult coloring books. This Santa picture appears in my coloring book, Santa's Christmas. It was also a featured image in the Christmas special, issue number 29 of Coloring Heaven magazine. Most of my coloring books are in grayscale. I convert my full-color paintings to grayscale and then carefully adjust them so they are easily colored using colored pencils. I hope this tutorial will be helpful to people that are unsure of how to approach coloring over shades of gray. So let's get started. These are Prismacolor Premiers, my favorite brand, but you can find other brands that work just as well. Search for comparable colors. This is cream. It's a very, very pale yellow. And I'm starting I like to start with the lightest colors in a picture. And sometimes I'll do the entire background first and then do the figure, but I often go back and forth with the figure in the background, and especially work in some of the colors that are in the background and see where they might apply to the figure. For instance, this Santa, to make him feel like he's in this very warm environment lit by candlelight, I'm putting the cream over the light areas of his hat so that his hat and his hair, which are white, are glowing with a very warm yellowy overlay of color. And you notice I'm laying this on pretty loosely. You know, the picture is doing so much of the work. You know, I'm going right over the grays, the middle tone grays, and I'm just sort of doing these big swoopy circles. In some areas, I will be rendering more closely, but in a lot of the time when there's a lot of detail in an area, you can just sort of overlap and not be super detailed about it, and the gray, you know, will be the thing that creates the depth and the detail, because the gray shows through. Colored pencils are transparent, and you have to work really, really hard to completely obliterate the gray. So now this is lemon yellow, which I'm adding around the little candles, and then I'm going to go in with Spanish orange to give it more of a, you know, super warm glow. So usually with anything that's glowing and light, you know, you get warmer as you go out from the image. And this is just the beginning. I'll go back in later on and sort of burnish these areas. But with colored pencils, if some of you are already familiar, I'm sure, you know, you want to do things in layers. You don't want to press too hard, too fast. You want to start kind of slow and then build up your layers. So here is, I believe it's either goldenrod or I think it's yellow ochre that I'm using for the branches, the little branches, and I'm going to be speeding up parts of the coloring so that you're not here all day watching me color this one picture. I think it took me about maybe an hour and a half in real time, so this will be a bit faster. And here I am using just this one green, and I'm going over all the areas of the tree, including the darker background. And you see, again, colored pencils are transparent, and you know, it's lightening up behind the tree a little, but I don't mind that. It's like I like to put layers that are maybe a little bit lighter on the dark areas, and then I will go in, for instance, with a darker green and accent those. And this is an example of going back. You know, you often will go back and forth with pencils. You know, I'm sort of creating, you know, more of a glow. I'm adding red, and here, you know, just wanted this red to be pretty solid, so I'm putting it on full strength with a pretty strong hand. Putting cream on any areas that are white in the background. And then ginger root is a fun color to use for the shadows of, they make kind of warm gray shadows. So I'm adding ginger root in to his hat and his beard. And I will also be adding a little warm gray to the beard and hat later on. So just straight goldenrod for the little gingerbread man. You know, a few layers, if you can tell. You know, I'm speeding this up. And anywhere that I want to have red, I will often put, oh, this is pink actually. I'll often put a light layer first and then the color I want on top of that. So I'm going to show his hat in real time. So I want to show you how layering works and how to get a nice red. I wouldn't go straight red first. I find that if you put down a light color first, even on an area that you think will be, you know, much darker than this and much brighter, that putting down a lighter color first, for instance pink, even though I want a red hat, it will blend with the red and give a really nice bright red instead of red itself is actually quite dark. If you notice that the little bird with the red bow, that red is very dark. So to keep your reds light wherever you want a red, put down a number of layers of pink first. So now I'm speeding it up on some of the areas so that you don't have to watch me laborious do every single part. All right, so now I am adding the red, and this is poppy red, and I'm pressing a tiny bit harder and putting more layers in the shadows, but I am going over the light areas that I've put the pink on. So again, a few more layers in the shadow. And note again, this is not a dark pencil that I'm using in the shadows. At first I'm putting a layer of this poppy red in the shadows, and now I'm going over with even layers because the front of his hat is quite flatly colored, and so I'm putting on nice even layers of this poppy red, which will eventually be brighter, and as I develop the layers, it will look flat. But I do not press hard at first because I do want all the definition to show through, and if you burnish too hard too fast by pressing too hard with the pencil, you'll just kind of get a streaky mess. So with grayscale especially, and coloring line art, colored pencil technique is all about layering. So you see now that this is now the third layer of the red, the poppy red, and I'm going over the shadows with a little bit more pressure, and I will go over them also with a darker red pencil, but for now I'm giving this a bright base. Now again, another layer. I think this is layer 5. You know, colored pencils need patience. You need patience to work with colored pencils, but it's quite meditative. I feel kind of like knitting. Layers. You do rows and rows, and you do rows and rows with colored pencils too. Now I'm going back in with pink, and I'm pressing harder, and I'm burnishing the light part of his hat with pink. And I'm going to go back in also with red on top of this. I'm not pressing so hard that I can't add a little bit more color afterward. But you do have to be careful when you burnish, when you press hard. Sometimes that can lead to not being able to put any more pigment on top. So this is why you kind of want to leave it till last in the process of any given area. So you see how that's evening out the hat. So I'm using Crimson Lake to deepen the shadows now of the hat. So I'm going in and defining those areas more with the Crimson Lake. And again, if you put on lighter layers first, your dark colors will work better, and you'll be able to not have all those little tiny white speculation that you get with colored pencil a lot, because you already have a base. And then I will go over it yet again with the poppy red, and this is how you get a really even blend. Some people use other blending methods, and I have used those as well and have tutorials on them on YouTube, blending with Gamsol, for instance. And another good blending medium is a colorless marker, which is like an alcohol base, and that is something that melts the wax of the pencil and smooths it out. But you can blend right with the pencil itself. So I do like to pick out some little dark highlights, dark areas, accents with a dark brown. This might be a sepia, but any dark brown will work. Dark umber, dark brown, sepia. I'm going back in with the kelp green, the darker green, and accenting around some of the areas to really make things pop out. One of the rules of art in general is that when you want something to stand out, and it's a fairly light object, you put something darker behind it, and it makes that area pop out. I'm speeding up the demo here in this part just to show you how, adding those dark accents now is really making his hat pop out. And you can go back and forth with your colors. If you see something you missed, go back in with that color. If you want something darker, just go back in. And I'm doing this pretty loosely, pretty scribbly, just sort of indicate the impression of leaves behind leaves, or branches behind branches. So I'm doing a fairly open kind of scribbly technique with this dark green pencil. Now I'm going back in and putting pink over all the lightest areas of his clothing, overlapping a little bit into the grayer areas. Then I'm taking the poppy red, going into the shadows first and adding a layer into there, and then I will eventually go into the lighter areas with the poppy red as well. So I just want to mention that with coloring, with colored pencils, things always look terrible before they look good. So it takes a while to build up the color. And this is in fast motion, how I'm building up layers now of the poppy red, going into the shadow areas first and then over the light areas, so that the shadow areas get that deep color as well. But you notice even with all these layers, you still see the shadow areas. So I will be able to go back in with my darker pencil and add some more darks to that. But it doesn't look good at first. So here is the speeded up version of adding that crimson red and just going in and adding color to the shadows. You know, when there's an edge, you sort of give a more detail and more pressure in those areas. But it takes a while to build up. This whole video probably would be close to 2 hours if I hadn't speeded up parts of it. But hopefully you still get the idea and the concept and the technique from when I was doing the parts in real time. And I will do his face in real time, so not to worry about that. Again, you know, outlining some of those transition areas and finding the shadow areas, and you know, keep it pretty simple if you can. You know, the light areas get an even coat of light, and the darker shadows get an even coat of both the primary red and the darker red. So like his hat, I'm going back in and burnishing a little bit with the pink to give it a base for when I put the brighter red on, so that it won't be too dark. Here's the poppy red, putting it over both the shadow area and the light area. But again, colored pencils are transparent, so you can see the shadows right through, but this gives you a softer, more blended look. Now this isn't perfect. I'll go back in possibly later at the end and burnish this a little bit more. If I were going to be coloring this professionally for a job, you know, a professional illustration, you know, I'd spend, you know, I might spend 4 hours coloring this as opposed to the 2 that it took. But I'm hoping you get the idea. Oh, this little area of his coat I forgot, and here I am starting from scratch and just adding the red. So the shadow part of his beard and the hat is quite light, so I thought I would add a little bit of extra touches here and there, of little shadow areas here and there, and you know, you can do this or not, it's up to you. It just adds, you know, a little bit of extra detail in the shadow areas. So, you know, so that part is optional. I'm back in with the cream and making the white areas of his beard and the coat a little softer and a little warmer. Going back in with the ginger root. And you could add more colors to the shadow areas. You know, if you wanted, you could add a pale blue But I like having, when it's a warm picture with that glow from the background lights, I just feel like it looks nice to have everything glowing and warm, including the shadows. But, bluer shadows would look nice too. And here are some touches of adding touches of white. Just adding a few little extra white highlights. All right, now to the face. Coloring his eyes blue. I think that's non-photo blue, which don't let it fool you. It's really will photograph fine. And using a dark brown for a little bit of accents on his iris and around his eyes. Just a little bit. You don't want to over accent the eyes too much. You don't want Santa to look like he's got mascara on. So I'll use a medium brown for some of the accents, the darker accents. I don't always do this. Sometimes I'll just start with the light area of the face, but an option that a lot of people do is to accent the dark areas first. And I could have done that on his clothing as well, but find which works for you. Just finding all the darkest areas and accenting them with this, I think it's brown ochre. This is light peach, and I'm putting it over all the light areas of his face and overlapping into the medium tones. So don't worry about being exact here. If you're putting these layers on lightly, it really doesn't matter if you cross over into other areas, and you can even go over some of the darker browns that you've already put down. It's all going to blend together. The next color I'm going to use is peach, and I'm trying to find the sort of the middle tone grays and go over them with a little bit more pressure and a little bit more layers before I go into the lighter areas, which I'm also going to cover because Santa's face is pretty ruddy, so I don't want him to be too pale. Now I'm going over the whole thing, and again you see that transparency that the gray shows right through, and you don't have to worry about going in between things. Go right over everything. So this not pale peach, but peach can go over all the grays, even the ones that are reasonably dark. Oh, and his ear. Don't forget his ear. It's hiding there under his beard. This is nectar. And nectar is one of my very favorite colors to use for flesh, especially in darker areas, in shadow areas for Caucasian faces. So overlapping a little bit into the lighter areas, but leaving the lightest areas alone. So sort of circling around that highlight. You don't want to cover that with a color this dark. And his nose is going to be quite reddish. Going into all the shadow areas with with nectar. And hopefully if you're using a different brand, you can find a color that's similar to nectar. Because I find it invaluable for flesh tones. Okay. Now I could stop here, and again, how far you go with the face will be up to you. But I'm really going to pump up, the red tones in his face. After all, in the poem, it does explain that his nose is like a cherry, his cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. So this is light peach. I'm going around and around that little highlight on his cheek. Actual pink. Saving the pink more for the shadow areas and not going quite over the lightest area. But I'm pushing the pink into his nose as well. And putting pink on his mouth. On his lips. And of course, you have to match the cheeks, so I'm putting pink on that other cheek, because that's the one that's more in the shadow. So I thought I'd deepen his face in general here, so I'm going over burnishing with the peach to make those lighter areas a little richer in color. And I'm pressing a little harder now. Okay. Going back in with the accent. So you often have to re-accent places. You might put these as a base, and then if you want to re-establish them, go back in and add a little bit more detail again. So I'm going back in with the poppy red to make his hat a little redder, evening out his suit a bit more. And I don't always do things in perfect order when I color. Sort of as I notice something, I sometimes jump around. So this is me jumping around, and now that I've got that red pencil out, I'm thinking, oh, cheeks like roses, nose like a cherry. We need to add a bit more color even. So I'm pushing the color a little bit. I often use ginger root for just to deepen white areas like his eyes and his teeth. And this is sand. And I was feeling like his flesh was a little too on the reddish side. So this is a yellow base. No, it's not bright yellow, but it's giving him more of a warmer toward the yellow end of the spectrum in his flesh, as opposed to such reddish flesh. So again, this is optional. It depends on your sensibilities and what you feel like looks good in your own coloring. I'm going to speed up quite a lot and do the details of a lot of the rest of the picture. I'm putting this pale yellow on a lot of areas that are white, just like I did earlier. This is cream. And when you do this, it unifies the colors a little bit that you're putting on top of them. So the little bear is going to be yellow ochre, number of layers, putting more in the shadows, and I believe the little horse is going to be more of a slightly darker gold, goldenrod is the color I'm using for him. And I thought I would give him brown gloves, so those are mostly burnt ochre. And you notice that the darker colors leave more of a residue of a texture, and they take a lot more to blend, and that's true with regular line art if you're doing dark colors, and also grayscale. And to blend them, it's good to then go over that area with a slightly lighter color to blend, because if you go over it with the dark color, your object will become too dark overall. So you have to be careful not to burnish too much with a dark color unless you want that area to be completely dark and completely that dark color. And that's why we do layers of multiple colors. So this is the sepia, and I'm doing a little outlining and accents. And now I'm working on the bag, and I'm doing it fairly loosely. What I thought would be fun here is to do, really kind of an open texture to the bag, almost like a cross-hatching, and it'll give that effect of like a woven bag. So I'm doing really open strokes. I'm not being very careful with the strokes, and I'm doing that on purpose so that the bag has a very natural weave, open weave to it. Accents. A little bear, accenting the dark parts, a little clown shoe. So this is, something that, takes a little time, and I'm speeding it up so you don't have to watch me do this in real time, but you're getting hopefully the concept of it. And again, I'm cross-hatching sort of openly with this goldenrod right over the dark areas, blending, not really blending, but just going right over everything. So it's a little bit of a different way of working than you'll see on other people who do grayscale, who keep the colors very specifically in, light colors only go in light areas and dark colors only go in dark. And I do an awful lot of overlapping, and I think it makes a nicer blend in my mind. So these areas that I'm doing now are going to be red, and I'm putting on a base of pink so that the red goes on nicely. You don't absolutely have to do this, but I like to. And I feel it helps with the blending to have that lighter base underneath. The red ball, going back in with the pink, feathering the edges. Transitions are really important, and that's where you want to really blend a lot, is in transitions. Now his little suit is pretty much a flat red, so you can put that on with a pretty heavy hand and be done with it. As opposed to other areas where you're going to be a little more careful. spend a little more time. For instance, his face. You know, you don't want to be so cavalier and quick, you know, putting down layers on a face. You want to be very careful. But areas that already have a lot of texture, it doesn't matter if you put down your layers with a bit of, you know, a quicker, rougher hand. Pink, a little pink in the cheeks, and I'm accenting this is, I think, 30% warm gray, against staying with the warm theme, accenting some of the white shadows of white. Deepening the inside of the bag so it doesn't stand out so much, because we want those toys to stand out, not the inside of the bag. So I was adjusting the values of that area. Again, look how, you know, roughly I'm putting down this texture so you can see the bag and it really looks woven. So just have your strokes farther apart when you're putting them down, and you'll get that woven texture look. Burnishing, goldenrod, adding a few gold accents, and going back in again with sepia, just to accent areas and make you know, make a lighter area stand out against a darker background. Now I'm adding some final touches with the white pencil. White gel pens work good too, but they give you a bit of a thicker line. Now I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial on how I color over grayscale. Remember to keep a light hand when building your layers. Be patient, relax, and enjoy coloring. And here is the finished Santa. Bye for now. If you are interested in more of my grayscale tutorials, the link is posted at the end of the video.